Hey everybody, and thank you for watching another video. My name is Murge, and welcome to the Breaking Bad What If series that I call the Heisenverse, a series where I make a change somewhere in the Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, or in this case, El Camino timeline, and see how that one change ripples throughout the entire universe. And in this video, I'm making some major changes to the ending of Breaking Bad to better flesh out the events of El Camino, because for as much as I like the movie, I feel that if there are the few changes made leading up to the film, it could have been an even better addition to the Breaking Bad universe. But for that to happen, we need to start the story towards the ending of Breaking Bad, and there is one detail about Jack that I'm making up for this story that's gonna all make sense in the end, trust me. And before we get started, if you could leave a like on this video to support the channel, I'd appreciate it. Now, let's get into it. After killing Declan along with his entire crew, Jack looks down into the underground meth lab and is just fascinated by the setup. Not only because they managed to bury a school bus and convert it into a meth lab, but also because it gives him an idea on what his next project is gonna be, and that's making his very own doomsday bunker, something that he's been putting off until he's gotten enough money to do it. But now, with his nephew in a tank with hundreds of gallons of methylamine, they can literally print money. And Todd says to him, "Hey Uncle Jack, Kenny and the guys got just about everything. You, ready to go?" "Yeah, nephew, but hey, let me ask you something. This right here," Jack says, pointing down at the lab. "Don't it look like how those doomsday preppers make those apocalypse bunkers?" Jack questions with a sly smile. "You know what? It kinda does," Todd says. And the two walk back to the car and they head back home. So yeah, I'm starting off with one of the biggest changes that I'm going to make in this story, and that's exploring an interest that Jack's into, because I just feel that he gives off this doomsday prepper's energy, so I'm just going with it. Comment down below if you agree. So for the next few weeks, they start construction on the bunker, but when Todd's cooks aren't good enough for Lydia, the cash will slow up dramatically and putting a halt to the construction project, for now. But only a few days later, when Walter calls Jack for another job, he would offer them one cook in exchange for them to kill Jesse. And it wouldn't be long before Walter calls them again, but this time with the coordinates. But while in the middle of the conversation, Walter would suddenly change his mind and he tells Jack not to come. But having Jess gave his current whereabouts, he would come anyways. And it's a good thing he did, because when they pull up to Hank and Steve Gomez, they see Walter handcuffed in an SUV and Jesse sitting in Walter's car. And even though they identified themselves as the DEA, Jack and his guys are there to do a job, and that's to make sure that Walter's able to cook. And with them already having the supposed DEA agents outgunned, Jack looks over to Kenny and they start shooting. And when the last shot was fired, Hank leans against his truck clutching at his wound. And while looking at Gomez, who has a hole blasted through his chest, he crawls over to the shotgun near his fallen partner. But the moment he reaches out for the gun, Jack's boot comes down on it, and from here on out, he knows that regardless of what happens next, there's no way that he's walking out of this. And after Kenny finds his badge, Jack gets ready to shoot Hank on the spot, but he stops when Walter starts to yell from the back seat and begging them not to kill him, which buys Hank a few more minutes, but no matter what Walter says, there's just no scenario where Hank lives, and not even the promise of $80 million is enough to change their minds. So without hesitation, Jack kills Hank in the middle of his sentence and having Walter's entire world crumble around him as he falls to his knees and begins to cry. But while he's on the ground, Jack makes the connection that the coordinates that he gave him might just be the same place where the supposed $80 million is buried. So after digging for a few feet, Kenny hits something solid with his shovel. And when doing a little more digging, they uncover 7 barrels each filled to the brim, and they take it all. But not wanting to have complete bad blood between them, Jack gives Walter a barrel to call it square. And just when it seemed like Jack was gonna walk away, Walter points out Jesse hiding under his car. And after being dragged out from underneath, he now stands in front of Walter, Jack, Todd, and the rest of the crew, now with a gun to the back of his head. And all he can do is wait for a bullet to come any second. But instead, Todd would stop his uncle from pulling the trigger, not only realizing that Jesse working with the DEA could mean disaster for them, but also knowing how valuable he could be with their newly acquired methylamine. So with permission from Walter, they agree to finish the job back home, and from there on out, they go their separate ways for the next 11 months. And during that time while Walter's on the run in New Hampshire, the first thing Jack and his crew did was get the evidence from Hank's house. And after beating any remaining hope out of Jesse, they can finally resume construction on the underground bunker, which will be built right underneath the meth lab in a similar way to how Gus had his set up. And with the money that he has now, Jack would invest a decent amount into a bunker that could withstand a nuclear bomb. And he would even have it equipped with an automatic lock-in feature that once activated would lock down the bunker, not allowing anyone to enter or exit for 90 days. A feature that Jack personally opted for in the event of a police raid or even a nuclear apocalypse. And again, I know I'm speculating that about Jack, but it sounds like something that he would be into. So after months of construction and millions of dollars invested, the bunker would finally be finished, and it would have everything that Jack wanted, from a satellite phone to hidden cameras. This place would have it all. And to celebrate this achievement, Jack and his guys go down to Florida for the weekend to go jet skiing and just have a good time, but leaving Todd at the compound to look after Jesse. But during this time, Todd would take him out to his apartment to help him bury his cleaning lady, Sonia. But when he's told to get a pack of cigarettes out the glove box, he finds a gun instead, and he finds himself in a brief standoff with Todd, but he's talked down with the promise of pizza and beer. And as they watch the sunset, Jesse tries to hold back his tears, but he can't, and Todd would tell him, "You know, I got just the thing that'll cheer you up, Jesse, but Uncle Jack will be really upset if he knew that you were there, so it has to be our little secret, okay?" But Jesse remains quiet the entire ride back home, and when pulling back into the compound, instead of walking him back into his hole, they walk down a hallway next to the meth lab, and he shows Jesse the underground bunker, even telling him about the lockout feature and saying to Jesse, "It's badass, right?" And Jesse responds saying, "Yeah, it's cool." And after a quick tour, Todd sends him back down with a beer and a couple slices of pizza. It's been nearly 11 months to the day, and Walter on his 52nd birthday is back in Albuquerque and now wants to do business with Jack. But when he makes it very clear that he wants Walter dead, he gives them the satisfaction of seeing what Jesse has become before putting a bullet in his head. And now, face to face with his former partner, they both look at each other with shame at what they've become. Then out of nowhere, Walter tackles Jesse to the ground, and while Jack and his guys are laughing at him, with the click of a car alarm, the trunk swings open and the M60 assault rifle comes out and begins to spray bullets everywhere, with shots being heard for miles. And when it finally stops, Jesse, Todd, and Walter are the only ones unharmed. But when Jesse kills Todd and Walter kills Jack, he slides the gun over to Jesse. But in this version, Walter was never hit with a bullet, and having him able to stand tall to accept his fate. But when the sounds of police sirens are heard from a distance, Jesse drops the gun and rushes outside, and to his shock, he can see the glow of police lights headed his way. And fearing arrest, Jesse begins to panic, not wanting to go from one cage to another, especially when he just got his freedom back. And he stops when he remembers the bunker that Todd showed him a few months ago. So as he scrambles near the meth lab where the underground bunker is, Walter, who at first stands waiting for the cops, would quickly change his mind, not wanting to get arrested if he can avoid it. And he follows Jesse down to where he's going. And right before Jesse can close the door to the bunker, he sees Walter stumbling down the hallway. And hearing the sirens getting closer, he wants nothing more than to just leave him to the police. But something inside of him just won't let Walter go. And Jesse would sigh and say to him, "Come on, Mr. White," allowing him into the bunker. And as soon as the door closes, the automatic lockdown protocol is activated, and they see on a monitor that they'll be locked in for the next 3 months. But luckily for them, inside is everything they could need, from food to medical supplies, and even the surveillance camera feed showing them everything that's going on outside. And initially, they're a little apprehensive thinking that the cops will find them, but it would actually be the opposite, because the police will have their hands full dealing with the bloodbath that happened with Jack and his crew. And from the outside, the bunker looks more like a failed construction site, which gives them the best cover possible. And once they felt that they were safe, Walter was even able to use his chemistry prowess and make his own version of a chemotherapy that buys him more time. But even with all the medical supplies here, he doesn't know if he'll make it to 3 months. So while locked inside with Jesse, they'd eventually get around to speaking to each other. But it's mostly Walter just apologizing to Jesse for everything that he put him through, and he tells him the real reason why he did it. "I was selfish, Jesse. I needed you to be by my side. I just never stopped to think what you wanted from all this. And I'm sorry." And Jesse looks at Walter with watery eyes and tells him, I want to know about that night. The night Jane died." And Walter explains what happened, saying, I never meant for that to happen to Jane. It started out as an accident, but I just did nothing to save her." And Jesse would be cautious with his words, not wanting to say much at first, but would eventually accept Walter's apology. But they both know that they'll never go back to the partnership they once had. And with it just them two in the bunker for months, Jesse opens up to Walter about the experience of being held there by Jack, and mentioning what they did to him to make sure that he kept cooking. From the daily beatings and torture to killing Andrea right in front of him. And even mentioning Neil Candy Welding, who built the contraption to keep him chained up. And hearing all these details, Walter can only give a pained expression, and he apologizes once more. But all the suffering feels like it was worth it, because when checking around the bunker, they find the 6 barrels of money that Jack took from Walter. And although it's not the full 80 million, it's still a couple barrels worth. And Walter says while giving himself the makeshift chemotherapy, "That money, that money belongs to you, Jesse. Take it." And Jesse says while taking the lid off the barrels, "I'll take my share, nothing more." He says in a stern tone, thinking that Walter's trying to buy his trust. But Walter says as he drifts off to sleep, "Suit yourself." After a long 3 months, the bunker finally opens, and they see the compound is completely taped off with caution tape. But they know from watching the cameras inside that after the first 2 months, the cops essentially abandoned the place, which works out in their favor. And with their appearances being very different than what they usually look like, they use that to their advantage as well. But with all the vehicles confiscated by the police, Jesse would only be able to grab a single barrel, but that's more than enough for the disappearer. So together they walk while also rolling the barrel for miles until they get to a stranger's house. And Walter would offer a man $20,000 in exchange for his car, which would turn out to be an old El Camino not too dissimilar to Todd's car, and they're able to load up the barrel and drive off back into town. But while on the road trying to breathe a sigh of relief, the dark desert skies would be illuminated with police lights from behind them and having their hearts sink to the floor as they're pulled over. And Walter says to Jesse, trying to keep him calm, "They don't know who you are. Just breathe." But Jesse says nothing as he grips the steering wheel tighter when seeing the cop approaching his driver's side window. And the cop says to him, "Where are you guys coming from this evening?" But Jesse continues to look forward, still gripping the steering wheel and ignoring the officer, and Walter would try to speak up for him. But before he can get a word in, Jesse slams on the gas, peeling out and getting a head start on the high-speed chase. And he makes a first left, then a right, then another right. But when a dog comes out of nowhere, Jesse makes a hard turn to avoid hitting the dog, but in doing so, they end up spinning out and crashing into a nearby park swing set. And for a moment, both Walter and Jesse are a little disoriented, but they would have no choice but to get out on foot and leave behind the barrel of money that they just took from Jack's compound. And to better their chances, they would have to split up, with Jesse running through various backyards and alleyways until he gets to Skinny Pete's house. And for Walter, he runs into a nearby bar and quickly gets on a payphone and acts like he's talking to someone. He would stand watching the door for the next few minutes, but when he starts to hear more sirens coming from outside, he would leave out through the back door of the bar before the cops eventually come inside. And after narrowly avoiding arrest for the third time and now separated from Jesse, Walter figures with the amount of time that's passed, right now is the day after Walter Jr.'s birthday, and he wants to see if Gretchen and Elliot upheld their end of the bargain. So when he gets within distance of the house, he's only able to catch a glimpse of Skylar and Walter Jr. packing up their car. Because with the lottery ticket that he gave Skylar, it was able to get her a deal with the DA, and now with the additional $9 million from Gretchen and Elliot, they're just ready to start a new chapter in their lives, one as far away from Walter White as possible. And while he stands a safe distance as the car begins to drive off, Walter Jr. looks out the window, and for a brief moment, he sees a man that reminds him of his father. But that thought is gone almost as quick as it came as the car drives past them and they embark on their new journey to a better life and leaving Albuquerque behind forever. And for Walter, he feels a small sense of accomplishment knowing that after everything that's happened, he was still able to keep his promise that he made for himself about providing for his family. And although it may not have been the way he wanted it to be, the only thing that matters now is that they can live a life with a somewhat sense of normalcy. So while walking away not knowing what to do with himself, Walter would spot Jesse walking with a trash bag in his hand, but now with the haircut and the shave looking like his former self. Because while Walter was watching his family from a distance and hiding from the cops at a bar, Jesse went straight to Badger and Skinny Pete's place. And initially, he wanted to go back to Jack's compound to get the money, but with so many cops in the area right now from the high-speed chase that he put the cops on just last night, he would turn to his backup plan of getting the money from Todd's house, where he knows that he kept his money in some old books. But when he runs into Neil, Candy, and Casey disguised as police officers, Jesse would have to split the money 3 ways just to walk out alive. And when him and Neil are walking back to their cars about to drive away, that's when Walter catches a glimpse of the Candy welding truck, and he remembers the story that Jesse told him about the no questions asked welder who was hired to keep him in a hole. And he decides that his fight against Jack isn't over just yet, and he would seek to destroy the last sliver of the neo-Nazi gang by going after Candy. And seeing the address advertised on the truck, Walter takes note of it and he walks over to the A1 car wash that's now since been closed down, but he breaks in to get his gun that he kept in the vending machine, and to his surprise, it's still there. So now armed with a gun and a singular purpose, Walter heads over to Candy Welding, and he would spend his time watching the place while coming up with a plan to blow up the shop. And he's just waiting until they leave to make his move, because he's in no condition to attack anyone head on. But when he sees a Hummer pull up and strippers get out, he has no choice but to wait a little while longer. But while he continues to watch the area, to his surprise, he spots Jesse again, but this time sneaking in and looking to confront Candy as well. And when the strippers are finally gone, he sees Jesse go inside, and Walter would quickly climb through a gate and follow behind him as backup. And when he gets near the door, he peeks through the window to see Jesse having a standoff with Candy, who is now standing on the other side of the door. And him noticing one of the guys behind Jesse trying to sneak near his gun that's hung up on a rack, Walter would press the barrel of the gun right against the door, and he squeezes the trigger, shooting all 6 bullets through the door and killing Neil Candy. But one of the shots would hit a propane tank by accident, and while everyone is distracted by the mystery gunfire, in the middle of the commotion, Casey opens fire on Jesse, grazing him in the shoulder, and one of his bullets shoots through the door and hitting Walter in the chest. But Jesse gets him with a headshot that runs him through a vending machine. And seeing the tank getting ready to blow as the other guys run out the building, Walter stumbles inside to see if Jesse's okay, and he yells out with bated breath, "Jesse, And after grabbing the money out of Neil's cabinet, Jesse would see Walter collapse to the floor and bleeding from a gunshot wound. But Jesse, who doesn't even know how Walter got there, rushes to his side and tells him, "Mr. White, oh God, Mr. White, come on, I got you." He says trying to pick Walter up, but he just says, "Jesse, stop. I want this. You just make sure you have the best life you can out there. You hear me? Now go." And he runs out, leaving Walter inside. And seconds later, the entire candy welding company explodes in a glorious fire, and officially destroying the legacy of Walter White. And as Jesse gets into his car, before driving off, he would say to himself, "Thank you, Mr. White." And he drops a tear for his old teacher before driving away. Hey everybody, and thank you so much for watching this video, and I really hope you enjoyed another story from the Heisenverse. And with this one, I wanted Walter's presence in El Camino to have a positive effect on Jesse, and in a way also giving him a sort of redemption arc where he can essentially be the Darth Vader of Breaking Bad. But seriously, I think if Breaking Bad would have ended with both Jesse and Walter getting into the bunker, then this version of El Camino would have explored the aftermath of both their lives in a way that would have been more interesting from a story perspective and a worthwhile movie, but that's just me. But now I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of this story? Did you like it? Is there anything that you changed? And what is your favorite moment in El Camino? Whatever it is, let me know down below in the comments and I'll do my best to respond. Until then, my name is Murge. Later.